Okay. So welcome. My name is Steve Burg. I am a professor of history at Shippensburg University, and I'm really delighted tonight to be here with um, this talk uh, as the first of our series on Untold Stories. This project is a continuation of a partnership between Shippensburg University Center for Land Use, the Shippensburg University History Department, the Cumberland County Planning Department, the Cumberland County Historical Society, the Pennsylvania State Historic Preservation Office, and the South Mountain Partnership. And the goal of this collaboration is to empower local residents and officials to identify resources they wish to preserve and to understand the methods available to them to preserve those resources and build greater interest throughout the region in preserving historic structures, landscapes, and farmland. I would also just like to mention that this session has been produced with financial assistance from the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources and the South Mountain Partnership. And not only are we going to get to enjoy the talk tonight, but we really are creating this as a ongoing available resource for people who are interested in doing this work. This is one of 3 workshops that we're doing virtually this fall, focused on the topic of untold stories. And really our goal is to ensure that as part of this larger push to encourage people to preserve stories and to preserve historic sites that contain those stories, that we also want to make sure that we are preserving the sites and stories that reflect the full diversity of the region and its people. And so tonight, we are very, very fortunate to have with us Samantha Dorm. Samantha is a senior grant consultant with over 20 years of experience. She's been instrumental in providing grant writing guidance to various public safety and nonprofit agencies throughout the United States to enable them to obtain alternative funding, as well as provide instruction on statistical compilation, analysis, and program development. She's been a reviewer for several federal agencies and instructs grant writing workshops. She is also an incredible historian and someone whose work I have admired for a number of years. She's recently been added to the board of the York County History Center. She is one of the founders of the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of African American cemeteries in York County, Pennsylvania, by honoring the memories of those interred in their folds through historic research, documentation, education, preservation, restoration, and community engagement. She is an active member and participant in the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds Network, the Black Cemetery Network, consults with the National Cemetery Administration to promote the care of African American veterans in private cemeteries, and she is an active contributor to the Veterans Legacy Program, highlighting the untold accomplishments of veterans. We are very pleased that she's appearing here tonight. Her work has been featured on PBS, WITF, CBS Sunday Morning with Martha Tickner, USA Today, a novel by Neil King, former Wall Street Journal writer, and in a CNN article by Elliot McLaughlin. So please join me in welcoming Samantha Dorm. And I go ahead and share your presentation at
Yes,
this
please do. And thank you very much. And while you're doing that, I always get a little leery when folks say historian, because I don't feel that I've earned that title. I'm still learning, but I'll take the title of storyteller.
Excellent. Well, feel free to go ahead, Samantha.
No problem. And we're going to go ahead and move forward. So we have here this first series with Untold Stories of South Mountain region. And for my portion of the discussion tonight, I want to talk a little bit about tracking the migration of Black families through cemetery records. So I am a volunteer with Friends of Lebanon Cemetery here in York County, Pennsylvania, but that has branched out to multiple locations, not just in this South Mountain region, but also into a number of states in the South. So as we move forward to the next slide, I'm going to kick this back to you, Dr. Burg, just to give us an idea of, what the South Mountain region encompasses and about the work that you're doing here, and then we'll get into my presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So when we talk about the South Mountain region, one of the things, it is one of the state's heritage areas, and it officially is defined as the region consisting of 4 counties, Franklin County, Cumberland County, Adams County, and York County. And the thing that is really so important, these counties on both sides of the South Mountain Ridge are connected. In some ways, the mountains divide the region, but in a lot of ways, the mountains give our region a sense of unity, a sense of common history. As Samantha and I were discussing earlier, there are trails and paths and going all the way back to the Native Americans that weave this area together. And so it's part of a larger initiative to look beyond simply legal boundaries and try to think about this as a region with a common history, a common culture, a common, and as Sam will talk about, people mixing, connecting, interacting throughout this entire area. So that's the sort of South Mountain region in a nutshell.
Thank you. And as we move to the next slide, so for my journey in all of this, I actually just got started in 2019 as far as volunteering at Lebanon Cemetery. History was never my thing. I'm a numbers person, and anytime that I had when I was still in school, then anytime that we were doing any type of test, this was the one subject where I really had to study because I couldn't retain it. I didn't understand it. I didn't relate to it to the point where if you asked me when the War of 1812 was, I had no clue. That's how bad it was when it came to history. But I've found in the past few years that when you are looking at or learning about people who not only look like you, but in many cases were related to me, it opened up a new passion. From that, we are finding so many different connections, and even within the Pennsylvania Hallowed Grounds, I feel like every time that I'm speaking to a group or going out and meeting folks with these cemetery stewards, I always come away with a cousin. True story. And that includes what we're doing here as far as looking at that Yellow Hill, Adams County area. So 2 of the key names that come up in that area would be Edward Matthews and Basil Biggs. And as I was researching my own family, I kept tripping over some newspaper articles in newspapers.com that other people had clipped where we were studying the same people. And these individuals are actively involved in Lincoln Cemetery, in Gettysburg, Lincoln Cemetery, in Dauphin County, some folks that were over into the Lancaster County area. And that's how we connected in finding that we are in fact related or that we have many associates. Now, for the families of Edward Matthews and Basil Biggs in the Gettysburg area, Adams County, Yellow Hill, putting together some of the information I just wanted to go over, and then we'll come back and talk about how we got to the stories. So this is a little bit about the Matthews family and how this all fits in with this South Mountain region. So the Matthews family of Yellow Hill in Adams County, which starts with Edward Matthews. He was very much instrumental with the Underground Railroad, as was Dr. Basil Biggs. His daughter, Martha Jane Matthews, I'm going to step back for just a moment and slow down. Thank you. Martha Jane Matthews in Harrisburg, she married an Alexander Scott. And so I came across some stories about the gentleman that is at the top of the screen here, facing towards the wording. That was Dr. William K. Scott. And Dr. William K. Scott's information is very widely known in the Anacostia area, where he was the physician down in Anacostia, but he was from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. His brother was a police officer there in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So Dr. William K. Scott, well known in Anacostia, was from Harrisburg by way of Adams County. Now, his aunt here in York, Pennsylvania, which would have been, I believe, Mary, she was the mother then of Virginia Harr. She married into the Harr family. And we study Virginia Harr in York, Pennsylvania. She's buried at Lebanon Cemetery, and she was a well-known artist here, but she was also very instrumental in the women's suffrage movement. So we were seeing a number of articles where this Virginia Harr and this Dr. William K. Scott were at the same functions, same birthday parties and things on that line. And I was wondering, why are these folks regularly being mentioned together? And it was because they were family. They were both members of the Matthews family. And then over in the Gettysburg area, Nelson Matthews married Hannah Ellen Biggs. So we mentioned about the Biggs family. Well, here in York, Pennsylvania, the grandson of Basil Biggs, who bears the same name, is also interred at Lebanon Cemetery. And he is one of the founders of our Faith Presbyterian Church. He started the Colored Boy Scout Troop 11 that was at Crispus Attucks in our town. So again, these names are so intertwined between the different counties, but all very accomplished families with roots that go back to the Underground Railroad, as well as roots that then dip back into Carroll County, Maryland, and Frederick County, Maryland, where my family is from, which includes the Dorsey family. And so, we're seeing this migration coming up from Maryland into Gettysburg, into the Hanover area, York, Columbia, and, all points going east as well. So as we're moving to the next slide here, I wanted to talk a little bit about, kind of how did we get here? How did we get onto this storytelling thing? So a little bit about Lebanon Cemetery. So Lebanon Cemetery is located in North York, just off of Route 30 it's at 1412 North George Street. So our cemetery was established in 1872. And of course, this was during a time when cemeteries were still segregated. I'm born nearly 100 years later, 1970. I didn't realize that cemeteries were segregated. And so for many decades of going and visiting my family, I never realized or put together that it was in fact a Black cemetery. It was just the place where my family was buried. And so without knowing that context to it, I also didn't know or understand the importance of the people that were interred within those 5 acres of land. Now, we have over 3,700 individuals that we can account for in Lebanon Cemetery. And when I say that we don't have burial records, we are still kind of recreating that information. I see 2 of our board members are on with us here tonight, Jenny and Demita, and it's still a work in progress. The big thing is being able to share the information, bringing the stories to life, and making sure that these individuals and their accomplishments are not forgotten. Moving to the next slide. What we find, and I imagine that many of you that are on here this evening or those that are watching later, if you're trying to do this type of work, specifically trying to tell the stories of African-American families in history, oftentimes our names were not utilized, our names were not published, or at least not our names in their entirety. It may have possibly been a first name, female or male, and then colored or Negro. So you have to sometimes look at other ways of coming about research, which includes looking at addresses. So anytime that we can get an address, whether that's from a death certificate, a marriage notification. It could even have been something where maybe someone got caught up with things, from the criminal element, but it gave us an address of where we might be able to track down this family. So in regards to some of the research trends and things that we're looking at, common names and addresses, perhaps the place of birth, place of enslavement, we have a number of folks that it is mentioned that they either came from the same area or from the same plantation. And so we're trying to figure out, were they related, or did they remain connected after they were freed? Any church associations, common employers, civic organizations, what affiliation they may have, as well as some of the military units. Next slide, please. So because I mentioned that, I'm very much a numbers person, many of the addresses just kept repeating as we were doing our research. And I didn't know why I was doing it, but I felt like I had to put this down into an Excel spreadsheet so I could kind of manipulate the data and try and figure out if there were any trends or patterns that came with the data. Now, if you are going to do anything where you're searching by address, I highly recommend making sure that you are listing the date and specifically the year in which whatever that source of information is coming from, in part because when we first started this, it never occurred to me that addresses change. And so we had in some cases where you had a family in the 100 block of North Duke Street, which is depicted here on the screen, where it looked like maybe they moved from 137 North Duke to 149 North Duke later. And I'm thinking, well, they just moved down the street, where in fact, they didn't move. Addresses changed here around 1903. And so it's just, again, really important that you make sure that you have the dates there. So we have some of the addresses, and then I would put a name or reference or what that resource was about. And so what we found was that overwhelmingly in York, Pennsylvania, the places where our prominent Black families lived, worked, and worshiped are now parking lots in the city of York. So as we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see then the 100 block of North Duke Street, some of the significance of that block. First of all, that is where our AME church started. Now, I believe the church started around 1811 or 1813, but they were able to officially have a building at that site, at that location around 1818. And so we have a map that clearly shows then, so Steve, under the letter W, there it'll say AME Church, and then it's also the burial grounds that's under that W there for the word ward. And so that shows us where the AME Church was located on that block. But also on that block were names like Hamilton and Jane Gray. Here in York, Pennsylvania, they are well known for their involvement with the Underground Railroad. Their daughter, Rhoda, married into the Goodrich family. She married Glenalvin Goodrich, whose father, William C. Goodrich, again, well known with the Underground Railroad. Down in Washington, D.C. today, you would be able to see some of the photography by Glenalvin Goodrich of York, Pennsylvania. And then mention that Glenalvin Jr., he came back to York and he started a business and was very active with that Faith Presbyterian Church. His business, that particular building, is actually still standing, and we're looking to see about a historical marker at that location. Another well-known family would be the Smallwood family, which included Professor James Smallwood. He was an educator, starting with teaching colored students. And yes, I'm going to say Negro, I'm going to say colored, I'm going to say Black, I'll say African American, according to the times that we're looking at in that terminology. I think it's important for people to know why we continue to use those terms. I know in many cases it's more politically correct now to put African American, but I can tell you, if you're doing this type of research and you put in the term African American in 1818, you're not going to get a hit. You're going to get hit with the words like colored or Negro. So it's important to understand and know your terms depending on the time frame in which you're looking at. So the Smallwood family, in addition to Professor James Smallwood, who later had a school named for him, which would be the Smallwood School. His sister and actually all of these members of the Smallwood family were very accomplished here, not just in York, Pennsylvania, but throughout the region. In the center, there is a newspaper clipping that is a sheriff's sale of a property that was adjacent to the church. And so through this sheriff's sale notice, we now have coordinates that tell us where the church was located. And so as we're moving to the next slide, you can see here where it helps to have friends who have multiple skills, but a friend of mine that works for an engineering company, I had given him those coordinates and he ran down to the location, which, as I mentioned, is a parking lot. So this is the 100 block of North Duke Street in York, Pennsylvania, where we have Seatown grocery store, and there's a Family Dollar and the Hair Depot. Well, underneath that parking lot would be a cemetery that was connected to the church. We have no records to indicate that the bodies were ever moved from that cemetery. So there is a high probability that the wife and at least two of the children of that Underground Railroad conductor, William C. Goodrich, is under that parking lot. And so that's okay. We can move to the next slide here. So another area that we talk about in York would be where our high school is currently located. So William Penn Senior High School, the picture there that has the red circle on, that is an aerial photograph looking down onto the high school area as well as to the Penn Park area. All four sides of the high school have significant history as it relates to York's Black history experience. Now, on the Pershing Avenue side, that is where the Smallwood School building was located, which is now part of the foundation of that building is still there. It is the cafeteria of the high school that is located there. But also on that side would have been where the school parking lot is for the administrators. They have Moravian Playground, which was the only playground for colored children, colored families from about I believe it was 1920 to about 1939 for the Moravian Playground. You also had the Howard Hotel. So where that where the red circle is located there, that was the Howard Hotel, which is listed in the Green Book. Safe place for colored, I see we have a question coming through, but a safe place for colored travelers coming into the area. And the picture there at the bottom, that is the Princess and Pershing Avenue. That Pershing Avenue used to be known as Water Street. And so where that location is now is where the gymnasium is for the high school. And within the newspaper articles there in the center, the lighter colored one, you have a public sale of personal property where that is talking about then that Howard Hotel and that they were going to be selling this property. As we move to the next slide, and then we'll get to your question here in just a moment. I had mentioned about Moravian Playground being where the parking lot is for the high school for, I believe, their teachers and administrators park in this particular parking lot. That started out as a cemetery. It was the Moravian Cemetery. The bodies were disinterred around 1905, and then later that became a playground area. One of the playground directors was a woman by the name of Joanna Harris. About 2 blocks away from this location, there is a street by the name of Aunt Joe Lane. Never knew why it was named Aunt Joe Lane. Well, it was named for Joanna Harris, this playground director who also started the Girl Scouts for colored children here in York, Pennsylvania. On the Princess Street side, we had at one point a cafe or tap room that was owned by John Terry. John Terry was an Olympian. He, like Jesse Owens, was there in Germany in 1936, and then he moved to York, Pennsylvania because of York Barbell. And he ran this tap room along with a Negro League baseball player by the name of Paul Country Jake Stevens. So all of this is concentrated into this neighborhood but none of the information, none of the stories were being told. As we're finding this information, we are making sure that we are putting that out there, public, open source opportunities, but also working towards educating the community on this type of work. So as we go to the next slide, it says here, have we done any ground penetrating radar scans or analysis of the parking lot? The answer to that is no. That would be in regards to the Seatown area. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we have our kind of Q&A here. Steve, if that's okay, we can talk about the ground penetrating radar as well as analysis and even what we can do from this point moving forward. So what you have here, first of all, the scan that's in black, that's from our website. So it's the Friends of Lebanon Cemetery, all one word, www.friendsoflebanoncemetery. And there's a tab that you can click on that is a blog that has stories about the people who are interred at Lebanon Cemetery. But also there's a tab for tours. So we do walking tours at the cemetery. We have some that maybe if all you're interested in would be a military tour. We have over 300 veterans. We've had some folks that came in and said, you know, we want to learn about the women of the suffrage movement, or we would like to learn about those leaders of York's Black churches, the founders of York's Black churches who are interred at Lebanon Cemetery. So we can modify the tours. We have plenty of content with having over 3,700 subjects and individuals. Including the fact that I myself have 6 generations of family in Lebanon Cemetery. But also we have a walking tour in downtown York that is has been coined the Paved Over Prominence Tour. Reason being, through the work at the cemetery, we have found that overwhelmingly the places where our prominent Black families lived, worked, and worshiped are all parking lots in the city of York. And so this tour is taking you to the parking lots. As we move to the next slide, as I mentioned, we do have the walking tour, but we are trying to build out different ways that people can obtain this information. Everybody learns differently. And also, quite frankly, we're all volunteers. So we don't have a lot of time to always physically be there for the tour. So we are in the process of working with some local organizations to see about putting in some of the storyboards that you would have these educational markers that would be near those homes for, as I mentioned, our prominent Black families, their homes, their businesses. And then also going to the next slide, we have been able to secure funding through tourism. And with that tourism grant, we are now incorporating what's known as augmented technology. It's AR resources, this augmented reality. So something like what you see on the screen here, where we have the pictures of the AME church at different locations. This is 3 of the sites until they found their newest home. And we can do 3D modeling and kind of recreate the communities. So as people are in those areas today using an app through Vision Solutions, they would receive these kind of like pop-ups that have infographics, videos, certainly links to other resources, books, and things on that line. And as I mentioned, that's all being paid for through tourism grants. Now, I see some other folks have joined here as far as those that are those cemetery stewards, because I'm coming back to the idea and notion that we are tracking families through cemetery records. That's where these stories are coming from. And being able to tie them in and show the relationship and the commonality in the experiences that our families have endured and persevered through the years has been something that, at least for me personally, has, you know, brought out this passion for what we can do and how we can make sure that our African American experience, the roles that we play in building this country, that these things are not being forgotten and that we can continue to highlight them. So with that, I will go ahead and open up for discussion. I'll send that back to you, Steve.
Well, thank you so much, Samantha. That was truly amazing and exactly, I think, a great kickoff to our Untold Stories series. I wanted to ask, one of the things that we're hoping to do is to help folks across the region do the same kinds of things that you're doing in York and really find these stories and connect to sites that tell, in this case, the African American history. And I was just wondering, for folks who are just starting out or who are interested in really bringing these stories to light, where would you recommend that they start? And how would they start this process?
Well, I think part of it would be even just to see, what resources they may have available to them. If you have an opportunity to go to a local history center or even to the library, many times they will have access to resources like ancestry.com, newspapers.com. Those are resources that you can also buy a membership to and be able to do your own research as well. But, maybe if someone's just getting started, you want to also, look at those resources that you have within your own community. And I think I would probably also like throw that back to the folks that are joining us here tonight to kind of say, where did you start? Where did you receive that information? Because for me, it's still a work in progress. We're learning along the way. And so I'm always open for tips and resources as well. But uh, I think when I got started was the year right before COVID hit. And so once we were into a situation of COVID and you couldn't visit those locations, it really was about newspapers.com and Ancestry and a number of resources that would kind of funnel out of that. The other places, talk to your families. You'd be surprised how much information is sitting in a book or an album that's there at home. And we oftentimes forget to speak to the elders in the family about history, about, learning about our own families and kind of branching out from there.
Beautiful. Um, and I had just one other question, for you as you're encountering these, many of the sites that you're discovering are paved over, destroyed, no longer on the landscape. Any thoughts about how communities around the region should um, mark those places that are important to the history but are physically not there anymore?
Well, I know we had the question from the Lieutenant Colonel here where he was asking about, have we done a ground penetrating radar? For that particular site, the answer is no. In part, one, either you are going to pay for that, so you have to have the resources for that, or certainly, try to partner with a local university or firm that might be able to do that type of work. But also, I think that people sometimes have to think about, if we do this, what is the end result? So if we do that ground penetrating radar and we do have a hit, then what? How do we what's the next step? How do we celebrate? And so for me, I'm not recommending any type of excavation. Realistically, that site, that cemetery would not have been used since about 1880, 1882. So I don't know how much would be there for us to find at this time. Um, but I do know by having at least the documents on paper that we can still celebrate, whether that's getting in a historical marker, the storyboard, the augmented technology, but also through the storytelling so that it's not forgotten.
Great. Well, I'm going to open it up to see if I could ask you questions all night, but I'm going to open it up to see if there's questions from others who are here this evening. So feel free to unmute and ask a question if you wish, or if you want to put something into the chat. Lieutenant Colonel.
Yes, I had a question. I guess we follow on to that, the first question. If those were discovered, um, and like you see in some other like archaeological finds or historical digs and so forth, and we find credible evidence of then what that follow on like you were saying, do we then document this, and then now that site becomes, because I know construction sites, if you find specific artifacts and so forth, that it now becomes an historical site, or if you find dinosaur bones, these types of things and so forth. So
Right.
I'm
Right.
alluding to, can we put measures of performance of some sort that would then key us into the next steps of acknowledging and then documenting and then putting something there that would give follow-on generations the understanding of what is actually there, instead of just a parking lot and
Right.
history is then forgotten. Because that's
So,
one of the things I emphasize with the cadets that are at York City High or at William Penn High School, as we support these things as well. So
right, with your JROTC program. So, one of the things when I've been doing these walking tours with paved over prominence at that particular site, because that kicks off what we call, zone 1, which is really the early years or documented years of York's African-American community. And I start that without, speaking, but actually, one time I used chalk, but other times I used people, and I had them, in essentially a square or the foundation of where the church was. They didn't know what I was doing or why I was putting them where I was putting them, but, and having everyone looking at one another. But in the meantime, the song "Oh Freedom" is playing. So I'm not speaking, they're just hearing the words, and they're hearing that, before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And so on that last verse, as that song is playing, then I explain to them, you are now standing in the original footprint of the AME church. There was a cemetery that was here. We have no record saying that these folks were ever disinterred. And everybody understands, you're standing on what was once a cemetery where prominent Black families were buried. And every single time I do the tour, everyone looks to me and says, well, what can we do? What should we do? And I kind of bring back to them, now that you know this information, now that I've shared this with you, what are you going to do? Because I'm one voice. So what can we do as a community to be able to uplift our families? That's an open question for anyone. I see Miss Barbara Barksdale is here with Midland Cemetery. Lisa Fager is down in that Washington, D.C. area, but Lisa is from Lancaster area. And again, we are finding our families, we are finding our connections through these cemeteries.
Are there any other questions for Samantha tonight?
can I chime back into what you just said?
Please.
Sure.
I believe the big thing, I mean, for my part, is emphasizing the cultural responsibility and so forth, and looking at the culturally responsive education as it applies to the history that I'm not originally from York, just coming as of the past 2 years, taking over the JROTC program there at William Penn High School, and emphasizing that the necessity for us to remember who has, in a sense, paid. I'm even asked some of my students who have the last name Smallwood, what the significance of their name is, and do they realize how, if they are related to those, relatives and so forth that helped to found York, the significance of what they and the impact that their family made to this region and so forth. So I think that's one of the things, as at an individual level, and then see the collective responsibility that we do have to educate this next generation. So that's what I see as part of that answer. But again, there have to be some other steps that give some landmark type of things to help.
And also recognizing that people learn differently. that is really where this idea and concept of incorporating the technology comes into play. So at the cemetery, which would be Lebanon Cemetery right now, you can download the app to your phone for free. That's on the Explore York site. And then when you go to our cemetery, you can do that self-guided tour through the app. But then the second site that we have already scanned is then around the high school. And so we are in the process of populating that information right now. Again, it's already up and running, Lieutenant Colonel, that you would be able to use that. But the idea is that outside of tourism, the school district would be able to use it, where you literally can take the students outside and walk around the perimeter of the school without ever actually leaving school property, no permission slip needed, and you've got a history lesson. The thing is, I know that the young people a few years ago were very much into Pokemon. It's that same concept of, if they have the app open as they're walking through, there are pop-up screens that either you can read infographics, or in some cases, it might be a picture where utilizing AI, now that person is telling their own story, as well as that 3D imaging for talking about something like the Howard Hotel, which was part of the Green Book, the original location of the Elks being there. As far as the connections between the counties and the locations, part of it is being done, of course, through Ancestry, but not everybody is looking at an Ancestry or I guess I would say a Find a Grave entry. And so, we've been trying to build out some of the stories and encouraging that we're sharing. I know that, we have a person that's in our cemetery who married an individual in Harrisburg, and they're buried in Miss Barbara's cemetery. So, we talk about some of the stories, and we may put something up and we'll just say, this is related to Midland Cemetery, or this is related to Ellsworth Cemetery down in Westminster. And I think anything that we can do to keep uplifting each other, as well as sharing our combined history, I think that is really going to help us in building out these stories and making sure there's some longevity that happens with this movement.
And if I could just add for a moment, I think the one thing that is very interesting is, I think as we continue doing this research, that we see that it's not just the family connections, but there's veteran connections, there's religious congregations that have connections, there's church meetings where groups are coming together, there's fraternal organizations and Masonic lodges that have connections throughout the region. And so it really, when we start to look beyond a single community, we really see this much more intricate web of interactions throughout the area. And I also, one other point I wanted to make real quick, and then I see that Lisa Fager has turned on her camera, is that one of the other things is, not only have a lot of the sites been destroyed or paved over, but there are lots of sites that are there that we have no idea that they actually have connections to African American history. I was talking last night with my students in Shippensburg that the building that was the Shippensburg Colored School up until 1936 still stands, but you would have no idea that that's what it is unless you really dig into the history. So I think for us, marking these places, telling these stories can bring things to light that may be still there, but are not visible because their stories aren't being told. Lisa, did you have something you want to ask?
Well, first I want to say I'm sorry I missed a lot of the presentation, so I have a lot of questions. So Sam, I'm going to have to call you, and
Please do.
Unless you recorded it, then that would be
recorded.
This is recorded.
Oh, awesome. Okay. I look forward to the link. But I came on the end of you talking about the technology. And so I'm really interested in that. And it sounds, I was just in Virginia at the Daughters of Zion in Charlottesville.
Okay.
And so I don't know the names of the technology, but they use an interesting app, and it sounds like maybe what you're talking about, maybe. But theirs is audio and based on location. So once you walk into their cemetery, it starts an audio tour, and it'll say, if you look to your left, you'll meet Mr. So and so. And so that was really cool, where because we just got some basic QR codes and it'll walk you through the cemetery, but I love that. And so you're saying that the technology that you described with the stuff popping up, that exists already?
Yes. And
Okay.
it is, we did, so it's the 360-degree scans with LiDAR.
Okay, yeah.
And then having the overlays with the information on. We've also provided a demo to the National Cemetery Administration to see about doing this at some of the military cemeteries throughout the country. So those things are taking place. For us, we're very fortunate. It's a local company, and our next step is going to see about incorporating avatars. So we want to work with like Civil War reenactors, get them into the green room, so that then when you come to the cemetery, we could actually have someone who is Civil War reenactor would be on the app guiding the tour for our 30 USCT that are on site. When you're looking at the app, with the naked eye from the front entrance, that's where we have the flags. To the right, we have now a Civil War Trail sign. So this year, we became one of the locations for the Civil War Trails program. So that sign is on the right, but on your left side, looking at the app, there's a large cannon that's sitting there. So it's not really there, but it's there on the app. To be able to do that. So that's why I said we have these different levels. But the big thing is, again, that's all being paid for with tourism funds. Okay, it's being paid for with tourism funds. So we're hoping that in the next round of the tourism grant, which will open in January, that we will be able to reapply for even more sites. Just today, I met with like the Cultural Alliance here in York, Pennsylvania, a local developer that owns multiple properties where it once was a vibrant Black community. So I met with the developers for that community who own the properties now today, as well as with WGAL. They came along for this tour that we could go through to see like where we can see about these historical markers, and the value of those historical markers that we put in can be used as our match for that technology so that we can expand more sites. So that particular area now has multiple murals. So, it's referred to as Mural Park. The idea is, because we already have the scans, you could have families that are there that are going to be at the same location at the same time, but using their own device can have a different experience. If they want to just learn about the murals, they want the art tour, they can do that. The other person can click that they want the Black History tour, but the family is still together having their own experience. Or even better yet, you come for the art one time, you come back to the exact same area, and now you can have a different experience. And we will be able to continue to kind of swap out that information along the way, that we own that content, and in then working with the folks. So again, it's important to have different ways of telling the stories. In that app, then we're able to connect like, hey, there's more about this person at the York County History Center. Go visit the History Center. There's more about this person in this book that was written by either Friends of Lebanon Cemetery or Dr. Scott Menges, or, so we're putting in and promoting other resources to be able to tell the story. So if you go to Lebanon Cemetery and you're looking at the military or the USCT story, you'll see something about Cyrus Johnson. But if you go to the History Center, now you have the Bible that belonged to Cyrus Johnson. And then you can go and do the AR tour downtown and see the home of Cyrus Johnson. So, that's how we're connecting these resources together.
Samantha, can I ask you, drawing on your experience as a grant writer, because it sounds like for people who are especially interested in telling these stories, whether it's science or technology or creating tours. The tourism grants seem to be, and all of the counties in the South Mountain region have tourism grants.
Yes.
Any advice for folks who might be thinking about trying to tap into that as a way to tell these stories?
Well, first of all, I will say I think it's the storytelling that really is keeping the preservation efforts and initiatives alive. When you ask people to come out to, hey, we're going to do a cleanup day at the cemetery, they may come out a time or two, but once you get into the storytelling and you're talking about preserving not just their resting site, but also their memory, you get more support and longevity of the interest. Like, people aren't just losing interest. So we really need to keep up the storytelling aspect of it. And for many of the cemeteries, people just don't have the resources to do that on their own. And that's where I encourage, whether that's going to be, high school students, or if it's going to be college students, or any entity that we can work with. I had a Theater for Arts group that just did the Paved Over Prominence tour, and they walked away saying, hey, like, we want to tell some of these stories maybe as skits that we can do to bring into the theater, to bring their stories alive. And so, again, that's just very important with that. I see Miss Barbara came off of mute, so I'm going to defer to the Queen. Thank you, ma'am.
Oh, you're so funny, Samantha.
We love you.
I know you do. I know you do. Besides, we're cousins. What can you say?
Exactly.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. It's Samantha. Excellent job. It just reminds me of something that Midland has done about 7, 8 years ago, when we had a Eagle Scout. That was one of his projects. And if you go on to the Midland website and click on the map, you will, on some of the people, I have to say, you can click on, you'll get their obituary. If we have a picture of them, we'll have a picture there. And then we also have actresses also recite their the words of their obituary or whatever their families gave us. And so then you can hear from the voice of a man or a woman talking about that man or a woman that's interred. So that's really good. And you young people have to take it to another step and make it, okay, this is really good. I love this. So this is something that we definitely need to share with the rest of the hallowed grounds people around the country, to make sure that everybody's getting on into this history, to bring these people to life. And that's Sam just said about, you're not just looking at a grave. You're looking at somebody who had been a contributor to American history as well as the world history. So really good. That's why I had to get online.
Thank you.
Steve, you're on mute.
Thank you, Barbara. I just wanted to see if there's any other questions. We may have time for one more question for Samantha before we call it a night.
What?
Anything?
And before, we'll see if there are any questions, but I also wanted to mention, the power of social media in sharing the information, and also in connecting us to resources, or even to some of the history with our own family. So on my mother's side, we're from Berkeley County, North Carolina, and specifically the Tuscarora tribe in that area. And so, learning more about that part of the family, I end up being connected to a young man in Elyria, Ohio, by the name of Ethan West. And what we found is that York, Pennsylvania, and Elyria, Ohio share much of the same history, the same experiences, because they were both connected through the B&O Railroad. So much so that when I visited their community this past April, I had helped them with some research out there, and came across information about a Tuskegee airman who had been killed over Italy that they didn't know about in their own community. So they now have been able to celebrate him and bring his story, to his family. They have a street named after him, as well as just this coming weekend, they're doing a brick honoring presentation for this gentleman. But when I was in their town in April, I had folks come up to me and they said, "You look like our Hawkins family." And I just laughed. So I'm from York, Pennsylvania. I'm in Elyria, Ohio. my mother's family is the Hawkins family out of Bertie County, North Carolina. You know, so that those same names, Hawkins, Smallwood, Outlaw, Biggs, but then they had another person that they gave me to research. Hey, Sam, can you find something about this man? He was our first Black teacher, and his last name was Spriggs. So I'm doing this research for them. And I couldn't figure out, like, why do I know this name Spriggs? And then it occurred to me that my great-great-grandmother out of Westminster, Maryland, was named Jessie Spriggs. So now I'm trying to figure, okay, now what's that connection? And sure enough, school teacher's family was from that part of Maryland. And so, you know, I don't say this tongue in cheek. When I talk to people now, I truly believe, like, the spirits know what they're doing. They're connecting us, have connected me to Barbara and Lisa, and then bringing Jenny and Demita and Ethan and all these folks that are in this storytelling world about our ancestors, coming out of the work that we're doing to preserve and protect historic Black cemeteries throughout the country, and being able to move forward with this initiative. So I'm really excited about this, and I was very serious about wanting to know more. And I can't let him just stay off camera or off mic, but just this past Sunday, I had the pleasure of meeting a Dr. Aaron Fountain, who was visiting York, came out to the History Center and struck up a conversation. And the first thing when he said his name, I said, oh, we have Fountain family members here as well. But I think he's doing some really important work. And sir, as we are wrapping up, do you mind telling the group a little bit about what you were working on?
Oh, hello. I would turn my camera on, but I have a severe headache. So
Okay.
yeah, so yeah, I'm a historian by training, got a PhD in history from Indiana University. Currently, finished my book on high school student activism in the 60s and 70s and FBI surveillance on teenagers. It's currently under a second round of peer review by the University of North Carolina Press. I'm currently like a independent scholar. I work in DC at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. So I just happened to be in York since I was in town for a funeral and decided just to explore the area since I've never been to York, even though I'm originally from the Lehigh Valley.
Thank you. And I'm sure with you being in that DC area, Lisa, you heard that, right?
I did. I'm like, he just needs to go a mile down the street to Georgetown, see DC's oldest Black cemeteries.
Oh, yep.
So I have your contact information. I'll be happy to get you both connected.
All right, no problem.
Thank you, Sam.
Well, I just want to say one last time, thank you, Sam, so much for an amazing presentation and for the really fantastic and inspiring work that you're doing. I think you gave everyone a lot of ideas, both about how to pursue this research and then some really amazing ways to share the research. So thank you so much. I did want to thank everyone for joining, and thank you so much for the conversation and the input. I did want to note that this is the first of 3 of the Untold Stories speakers that we're going to have this fall. The second speaker is going to be Joe Baker, archaeologist, who's going to be talking about Native American sites and resources on October 23rd. And then on November 14th, Barry Loveland is going to be talking about LGBTQ sites of the South Mountain region. So if you wish to join any of those, it's the same Zoom link. So please feel free to come online, and we would really enjoy seeing you. But once again, Samantha, thank you so much for your great talk tonight.
Thank you.
And all of your great work. And I'd like to just wish everybody a very good night, and please stay safe. And thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Bye. Great.